Chapter 9. The Measure of Trust. The following day, Clara sat at the kitchen table, a cup of English breakfast tea cooling beside her. The wintry conditions were relentless, and she'd opted for a brown wool dress, a thick cardigan, and a petticoat for additional warmth. She swept her hair back in a low bun, secured with a scattering of hairpins. Mrs. Kelly and Peter were gone. They'd left that morning. Their hurried and uneven footprints on the porch showed that Mrs. Kelly had pressed herself onward by sheer will. "You won't change her mind," Andrew said, cranking the Model T's engine after Mrs. Kelly dismissed Clara's last plea. Peter stayed close to his mother in the bench-style front seat. The cup Nathan had carved nestled in his coat pocket, the rocking chair placed across the back seat as they rattled down the drive toward the Kellys' home. "There's work waiting for me," Mrs. Kelly had insisted. "Peter needs clean clothes, and the hens won't feed themselves." The house felt odd without Peter's chatter and Mrs. Kelly's weary but cheerful repeated humming of Danny Boy. Clara clasped her teacup as Nathan's measured strides crossed the back porch to the kitchen. He paused, his presence both a question and an answer. "You've been up since dawn," she noted. "Couldn't sleep," he admitted, sitting down at the table. He shrugged off his heavy peacoat, the suspenders visible over a flannel shirt. His work boots, cracked and dusty, were fastened tightly. A cardigan, knitted by Clara, added an extra layer. His gaze swept the room before he said, almost to himself, "It's quiet in here." "Sometimes quiet is where we hear God the clearest," she replied. He let out a humorless chuckle. "If he's been speaking, I must have missed it." "Perhaps you weren't prepared to listen." She laced her truth with compassion. He studied the grain of the counter while the kitchen clock measured their silence. She rose and went to the stove. "Coffee?" "Please." She poured him a scalding mug, placing it in front of him with a serving of leftover biscuits. She'd wrapped the biscuits in a clean kitchen towel, then stored them in a biscuit tin. "They're a bit dry," she warned. "I used baking powder rather than yeast. Yeast is expensive, and we're running low." His fingers encircled the mug as if to absorb its heat. His hands were red and chapped. "Dry or not," he said, taking a bite, "they're delicious." She smiled, appreciating the compliment. The crunch of tires on frozen gravel broke the moment. Thomas's truck, a Ford Model TT, utilitarian and basic, sputtered to a stop, the flatbed piled high with wooden crates and planks. He'd done well for himself in recent years. Nevertheless, it hadn't always been so. There'd been a period when he watched others, such as Nathan, carve out success with their skillful hands and sharp eyes. Nathan had been the first to find prosperity, tables that defined a room, cabinets with joints so perfect they would never come apart, and chairs that conveyed a subtle elegance. Many called Nathan's work art. Thomas had taken note and carved out a course of his own. His pieces were plainer, built for everyday living, sensible, sturdy, and affordable. Chairs with no wobble, tables that didn't bow, cabinets with clean lines, balancing utility and attractiveness. That feasibility had established him as indispensable to the families of the surrounding counties, and it had proven lucrative enough for him to invest in a truck. The truck allowed him to deliver finished furniture to customers miles away and haul materials, thus sparing his team of horses. Where Thomas once tracked losses in red ink, he now logged orders from families choosing his pieces. He climbed down from the truck and tipped his hat, nodding a greeting. Margaret sat on the truck's bench passenger seat, her hair windblown beneath her cloche hat. Soon, Andrew's Model T parked behind them. "Edward has spoken directly to Chairman Proctor," Thomas announced to Clara and Nathan as he strode up the porch steps. He's promising to build a company store in Evergreen Hollow, providing credit to mill workers who commit to contracts with the factory. Trapping them in debt, more likely, Margaret scoffed, accepting Andrew's hand as she descended from the truck. Andrew's blue-gray eyes softened when Margaret met his gaze. "We brought over as much as we could find," Thomas continued. "Father's earliest pieces, photographs, account books, showing what people will pay for quality." He glanced at Nathan. "The Henderson cradle, how close are you?" "Nearly finished," Nathan said, ushering them inside. "But they'll scoff at what I'm offering, a man with worn tools while Edward dangles gold." His fingers drummed in his hand, a rhythm like coins dropping. "Sometimes I think Father knew this day was coming." "I have something that may help." Andrew drew a telegram from his coat pocket. "I contacted some colleagues who live in Chicago. They've documented what happens to rural villages after factories arrive, and the numbers aren't pretty." Clara stayed on the porch. Weak sunlight cast honeycomb shadows through the beveled glass of the workshop windows Nathan had insisted on installing. "The workshop," she breathed, an idea crystallizing as she rushed inside. "Nathan, you must invite visitors to see it. Let people breathe in the cedar and oak. Watch your hands form gorgeous pieces from raw wood. Allow them to witness what some are trying to destroy." His fingers curled into fists at his sides. The workshop was his refuge, his private area of clamps and chisels and tranquil concentration. On meeting her gaze, his expression shifted from granite to clay. Slowly, his fingers unclenched, and he gave a single, slight nod. "I'll trust your wisdom in this," he replied. Word circulated quickly through Evergreen Hollow that Nathan Whitmore had opened his workshop to visitors. By the next day, curious villagers arrived at the end of their drive, drawn by the prospect of witnessing the reclusive craftsman at work. Clara arranged chairs while Nathan organized his tools, the placement as intentional as a prayer. The Henderson cradle sat center stage, sunbeams emphasizing each hand-hewn curve of the cherry wood. The day yielded commonplace sounds: maples lowing from the barn, shadow-hunting mice in the garden, and Nathan's soft whistling of Red River Valley, though he probably didn't realize he was whistling at all, a tune that his father had taught him, its melody of love and longing suiting the gentle contours he shaped. In the past, Clara often paused outside to listen to him. He'd whistled as he courted her, the same sweet notes, carrying hope instead of sorrow. Some habits survived even the deepest losses. She grinned. This was a sign of healing in her husband. "Are you certain about this?" Margaret asked, coming up to help Clara sweep the corners of the workshop floor. "Edward's supporters—" Her voice trailed off at the commotion outside. Mrs. Ebenezer Proctor stood at the forefront, her silk-collared coat and tortoiseshell pins identifying her as the village's leading lady. As a selectman's wife, she wielded the influence that stemmed from decades of her husband managing a wide range of issues, from road repairs to school budgets. Behind her stood several prominent businessmen, merchants, and landowners who invariably had their opinions heard at annual meetings. "Shall I ask them to leave?" Andrew advanced, his lawyer's instincts rising to defend them. "Number we decided, and we will follow through," Nathan said. "Admit people a few at a time." He moved to his workbench as the first visitors filed in. He lifted a chisel, testing its edge with practiced care. This was Nathan as intended. He wasn't hiding, but sharing his talent. "What's he making?" someone whispered. "A cradle," Mrs. Henderson answered. "For my grandchild." Gradually, The whispers died. Mrs. Proctor craned her neck, watching as forms shaped beneath his chisel. My husband thinks I don't listen when the selectmen gather in our parlor. She spoke quietly to Clara and Margaret. However, our village is only the beginning. Edward is targeting every small workshop within 50 miles. Those who refuse to sell, he's already cutting off their supply of lumber and their access to customers. Margaret went pale as she grabbed Clara's arm. I've heard Edward speak of market consolidation in Chicago. Nathan's chisel continued its solid cadence, and Clara recognized the stoic glances between the brothers. Thomas's expression shifted to match their father's old look of calm defiance. His fingers twitched, as if fighting the urge to pick up his own tools. Peter Kelly weaved through the crowd to stand beside Nathan's bench. Your mother feeling any better? Nathan asked, setting down his chisel. Yes, sir. She told me to thank you for the firewood and for the food Mrs. Whitmore sent over. The boy's eyes shone as Nathan guided his small hand over the smooth cherry surface. Place your hand here, Nathan said, tapping a spot where dark lines split and merged. Nature sketched this path years before we found it. Our job is to read what it's telling us. Peter nodded. Feel that? That's the heart of the tree. Even after it's cut and shaped, it remembers what it was. Like people, Peter said softly. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Even those who Clara suspected were Edward's most hardened supporters lapsed into silence at the truth in the boy's assertion. My husband says machines can produce cradles considerably faster, Mrs. Proctor said, and more efficiently. Yes. Nathan's hands never stopped moving. They can produce 100 identical cradles in the time I take to build one, but each piece of timber bears its own unique past. He gestured to the small chairs he'd made for the state home for children. Similar to people, because no two are exactly alike. What appears as a flaw on the surface is the most stunning aspect, if you know how to work with the wood instead of against it. Mrs. Phillips, another resident, approached, her gloved hand hovering over the cradle's evolving design. I owned one of your pieces, she said. A jewelry box with roses etched on the lid. I traced those roses every night before bed. Her chin lifted, voice cooling to match her proper posture. Progress is inevitable, Mr. Whitmore. Progress doesn't mean forgetting who we are, Clara said, as all heads twisted to her. Look around this workshop. Every tool, every piece of wood, every finished creation is a tale of who we are as a community. Can a machine offer the same? Outside, clouds parted. Sunlight spilled through the beveled windows, illuminating the cradle's curves, the waiting tools, the faces of neighbors who had come to judge and stayed to wonder. Soon they would face the selectmen, with Edward's assurances of victory arrayed against them. At present, Clara recognized a divine gift in the testimony of an artisan shaping splendor. As the crowd departed, Mrs. Proctor lingered. My daughter is expecting her first child in Wellesley, where all is modern and new. Her eyes found Nathan's. Perhaps tradition is worth preserving after all. Afternoon faded to evening, and Clara discovered Margaret in the kitchen, her fingertips running along the leaves Nathan had carved into the woodwork. Edward sent word ahead of his arrival, Margaret said. He wants to take me to the Atherton place for supper tonight, after he meets with his investors. Her hands worried the folds of her dress. He claims that if they don't accept the factory, he'll reveal information about Father's business, his legacy nearly failing before Thomas saved it with his practical furniture. How Nathan's stubbornness! Your husband doesn't understand what he's really fighting, Clara said. Does he? No. Margaret's eyes glistened. In Chicago, the goal is efficiency and profit. Edward gauges success in units produced per hour. Watching Nathan today, seeing how folks responded to his work. A shadow fell across the floor. Andrew stood there, his tie loosened, his suit vest creased, and legal papers clutched in his hand. I discovered more information. He spread out several documents. In 1868, the founders of this village specifically protected traditional trades. If we can prove that handmade furniture is an element of our cultural heritage, heritage won't fill empty plates. The statement came from Thomas, who'd followed them from the workshop. He'd scarcely spoken all afternoon, observing Nathan's techniques. His fingers tapped against his leg, betraying the craftsman alive within the businessman. Edward is offering proper jobs and actual security. At what cost? Andrew challenged. These factory contracts, I've reviewed them. Workers will be bound to company credit, company housing. They'll lose their independence. Before Thomas could respond, Nathan, wearing his work apron, strode inside, the evening's lamplight spinning stray drifts of sawdust to gold in his hair. Come with me, he said, all of you. He led them to his workshop, where the Henderson cradle waited, nearly complete. Beside it rested their father's workbench, its scarred surface holding decades of family history. Where was this? Clara asked. After Father died, I couldn't bear to look at it. Tucked it away behind the feed bins the week after the funeral. Nathan's fingers drifted across the bench with absent precision. Father's signature joint work. Here and here. He motioned to Thomas. You recall helping him? Yes. Thomas rubbed his left leg. His plane slipped and left a deep gouge in my leg. You were what, 12? Nathan asked. Learning to sand while I practiced carving. Thomas nodded. Summer before harvest. I was trying to help, standing too close. Father was working on a cabinet for Aunt Elizabeth. He winced. The plane caught wrong. I saw it happening and didn't move away fast enough. You were yelling so loud, Nathan said. There was blood everywhere. Mother wrapped it tight with her quilt. She stopped the bleeding before Father could fetch the doctor. She was furious, not at you, but at Father for allowing you so near the dangerous tools. We were different then. Learning meant standing directly in the thick of things. Thomas offered a hint of a smile. Boys want to be men before they understand what that means. The factory can't replace any of those moments, Nathan continued. Not the knowledge passed from father to sons. You're trying to protect his legacy by adapting to modern times. I've tried by holding on to the past. Maybe we're both right and both wrong. Maybe. Thomas tapped a minor defect in the wood where the grain swirled, creating a natural pattern that their father had incorporated into the design. They want more than the land for the factory. They want our name, 3 generations of Whitmore artistry. Reduced to a brand stamp on machine-made furniture, 500 pieces a day. Margaret waved Edward's telegram, the paper thin as her marriage had become. From the other side of the room, Andrew studied the legal papers, his calm competence a dangerous comfort. The Chicago investors, she began, then stopped as his eyes met hers. Some truths were better left unspoken in a rural community where even the walls listened to conversations. Then we fight, Andrew said, not only for the past, but for the future, for a world where development doesn't mean losing our empathy. Darkness gathered, and a train whistled in the distance. Soon, they would face the State House Committee in Boston, a 3-hour journey by rail that would transport them from their country valley into a realm of marble corridors and brass nameplates. In the workshop, amid the scent of fresh-cut cherry, truth took root. It lived in Thomas's thoughtful features as he ran his palm over their father's workbench. In the sure way, Nathan's chisel found its mark. As if to emphasize the point, Clara felt an easy tumble beneath her heart, their child declaring itself with discreet certainty. She shifted to the window, her breath clouding the glass. Each snowflake reflected the moonlight, resembling tiny stars. "Your husband is really coming, then," Nathan said quietly. "Edward and his promises of improvement." His chisel found the last elusive curve of rosettes on the Henderson cradle. Thomas leaned in, and for several beats, the brothers stood in shared conversation, reminiscing how their father had taught them these same patterns. Andrew spread a charter across his lap, highlighting relevant passages, while Clara tucked away some of Nathan's tools he wasn't using. Momentarily, Edward would arrive. It took a while to travel the 3 miles from Wiley's Crossing in wintry weather, and to arrange transport by horse and carriage, though each crunch of boots prompted them all to pause. Over an hour later, Margaret's soft gasp pulled their gazes toward the window. Edward's figure materialized in the swirling snow, his black wool overcoat dusted white. He brushed snowflakes from his hat brim before grabbing the workshop latch. The wood shavings beneath Clara's feet whispered as she scurried to the entrance. Her snow angel kept faithful guard, its wings unfurled. Strange how it hadn't melted, even when the sun shone brightly upon it. A solid reminder that certain wonders endured beyond nature's usual course. "I'll greet him." Thomas strode past and kept the door slightly ajar. "Your father believed in me once." Edward's voice carried as he conversed with Thomas. "He claimed I could bring this village into the modern age. Don't allow your brother's outdated notions to hold us back." "Our father supported artistry," Thomas argued, "in items that lasted. A luxury we can no longer afford. People want furniture they can buy on credit or replace when fashions change. Progress isn't always going faster." Nathan stepped outside. "More often, it's remembering what matters." "The special meeting is on Tuesday," Edward reminded. "I trust you'll all decide on the sensible choice." He gestured to Margaret, who had stepped to the door with Clara. "Coming to supper with me, dear?" "I'm not hungry." Margaret marched past him to stand between her brothers. "I believe," she replied, "I'm exactly where I need to be." Although he was a short man, Edward rose to his full height, his thin frame accented by the sharp cut of his coat, all edges and angles. "This isn't finished," he said, each syllable bitten off as a reprimand. A muscle flickered in his jaw, the only crack in his otherwise composed facade. As he swiveled toward his horse and buggy, the snow immediately erased his footprints. The path between Nathan's workshop and Thomas's house remained clear, as if worn by years of brothers, walking back and forth, sharing skills and stories and life itself. Edward's last look, keen as a chisel's edge, sliced between Margaret and her siblings before he clipped the horse into a trot, snow spinning in the buggy's wake. "He'll try to convince the selectmen that tradition is hindering our residents," Andrew warned. "He'll say modernization is inevitable." "We'll display pieces that defy copying." Nathan pivoted back to his workshop. "A mother's midnight watch, a child's first steps." Thomas followed him. The brothers' shadows merged while they bent over the cradle, 4 hands moving in the ancient measures their father had imparted. Late into the evening, Clara brought them coffee, pausing to savor the sight of the men collaborating again. The workshop glowed like a beacon, and decades of seasoned timber lined the walls, cherry, maple, oak, each piece specifically selected. Nathan's head lifted as Clara entered. "You should rest," he said. His eyes brimmed with a protective weariness. "The baby?" "The baby is telling me to make sure the baby's father and uncle don't work all night," she replied with a smile. Thomas set down his plane, the blade honed to a razor's promise. "Nathan, the detail there." He pointed to a pattern emerging on the headboard. "Is that?" "The rose pattern from Father's design book." Nathan nodded. "Look closer." Clara rushed over, her shadow lengthening, silent as dust settling. "Oh, Nathan," she gasped, "these are impossibly beautiful." Within the twining roses, small wings appeared where Nathan's tools had found them, so fine they might have grown there naturally. "To match your snow angel," he replied. "Angels are always watching over the little ones, watching over us all." Margaret stepped in with Andrew, their arms overflowing with papers. "Doesn't anyone sleep around here?" Margaret asked. Clara grinned. "Apparently not." "We're continuing to organize for next Tuesday," Margaret declared. "We've assembled the historical records, the town charter, photographs of Nathan's finest pieces. And this?" She held out a faded daguerreotype, an early photograph on a silver-covered copper plate. Their father in his workshop, a young Nathan and Thomas on either side, their hands on the very bench that now stood witness in Nathan's workshop. In the image, 11-year-old Nathan stood slightly taller than his younger brother, his shoulders already hinting at the strength that would define him. His short, neat, dark hair and serious face gave him a watchful look beyond his years, eyes deep set. His knickers buttoned below the knee, woolen stockings pulled high, and leather lace-up shoes. A button-up shirt peeked out beneath a woolly jacket. Clara smiled. Even then, his precise nature showed itself, from his perfectly buttoned knickers to his carefully smoothed stockings, each detail arranged just so. Thomas was leaner, all knobby knees and narrow shoulders, his face still round with childhood. His knickers, slightly oversized, sagged, held up by a pair of crooked suspenders. A loose, button-up shirt hung untucked at his waist, sleeves wrinkled as if hastily rolled up. Their father anchored them, his hands broad and weathered, relating a story of decades spent shaping wood and sons alike. His clothes bore the marks of his trade, simple, durable, and lived in. Sturdy canvas trousers, the knees softened and patched from years of kneeling at his workbench. A faded flannel shirt hung loose on his frame, revealing powerful forearms marred with nicks and calluses. Over it, an apron bore streaks of oil and faint traces of chalk, its pockets weighed down with pencils, nails, and the stub of a carpenter's square. A wool flat cap, pushed back on his head, framed his lined face. "Where did you find this?" Thomas asked. "Tucked in some paperwork, and there's this." An inscription. Andrew brought the lamp closer. Their father's scribbled handwriting flowed on yellowed paper. "To my sons, remember that true craft, like true faith, is passed from heart to heart, hand to hand. Progress without soul is merely motion." Nathan nodded and pointed to the cradle's headboard. He'd carved a scene from Evergreen Hollow, the church spire, the rolling hills, and, in the foreground, a workshop where a father taught his sons the meaning of technique and love. Thomas's hand found his brother's shoulder. The rift of these past seasons sealed itself in that grip, understanding passing between them without the need for words. Snow continued to fall, transforming the angel's wings. Each flake was a living sketch that breathed and changed with each passing second. The next few days, few weeks, would test their beliefs, their innate understanding of advancement. But in this instance, Peace settled over them as God's blessing. Some battles were won not with arguments or legal papers, but with truth hewn in devotion, memories rendered real, and faith preserved through generations of steadfast commitment.